My name is Abigail Stewart, and I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, as they say. Not that I realized it at first. When you grow up wealthy, you think everyone lives like you do. Our family owned the largest chain of pharmacies in the state, Stewart Pharmaceuticals. It wasn't just a business, it was my grandfather's legacy. He built it from nothing, and my father David inherited it when I was just a kid. The business became my father's whole identity. He'd walk into our massive Victorian house after work, loosen his expensive tie, and start talking about profit margins before even saying hello. Another record quarter, he'd announce at dinner, while my mother Margaret nodded approvingly, adjusting her pearl necklace. This is what I'm going to pass down to my children someday. My older brother James would just push his food around the plate during these conversations. Even at 12, while I was still playing with dolls, he was more interested in ancient civilizations than profit margins. He'd try to change the subject to his latest archaeological discovery from the backyard, but Dad would just wave it off. I was different, though. Even as a kid, I loved helping out at the pharmacies. By the time I was 14, I knew all our regular customers by name and could recite our inventory like the alphabet. Dad noticed. Now that's my girl, he'd beam when I'd tell him about helping an elderly customer find the right medication or suggesting a new display arrangement that increased sales. She's got business in her blood. The shift happened gradually. As James buried himself deeper in history books and archaeological journals, Dad started bringing me to business meetings. By 16, I was doing inventory counts and helping with basic accounting. "Watch and learn, Abigail," Dad would say, showing me how to review contracts. "This will all be yours someday." My mother was thrilled too. Finally, someone to carry on the family tradition properly, she'd say, giving me expensive business suits for my birthday while James got cheap history books. I remember the day James announced he was going to study archaeology in college. We were having dinner in our formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier that cost more than most cars. "You're what?" Dad exploded, his fork clattering against the fine china. "No son of mine is going to waste his life digging in the dirt." "David, please," Mom tried to calm him down, but her face showed she agreed with him. "It's what I love, Dad," James said quietly but firmly. "I've already been accepted to the program, and Professor Anderson says I have real potential." "Potential to be poor," Dad shouted. "We're business people, not dirt scholars." I watched James's face set in that determined way I knew meant his mind was made up. "Then I guess I'm not a business person," he said, standing up from the table. That was the night everything changed. Dad turned all his attention, and expectations, to me. I was no longer just the backup plan, I was the future of Stewart Pharmaceuticals. The pressure was intense, but I loved it. Or at least, I thought I did. Preston Business College was everything I'd dreamed of, prestigious, competitive, and full of other trust fund kids just like me. I felt right at home with my designer clothes and platinum credit card. That's when I met Zane. It was in the campus library, of all places. I was struggling with a coding assignment when this guy at the next table noticed me cursing under my breath at my laptop. "Need some help?" he asked, sliding into the chair next to me. He had the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen and a slight accent I couldn't place. That's how it started. Zane was brilliant, he'd gotten a full scholarship to study computer science and was at the top of his class. Everyone knew him, professors would use his projects as examples, other students would fight to have him on their team for group assignments. But he was so humble about it all. It took me 3 coffee study sessions to work up the courage to ask about his background. He told me matter-of-factly about his parents immigrating from Syria when he was little, about his dad working security and his mom cleaning houses. How he'd been coding since he was 12, teaching himself on a second-hand laptop. "I used to do freelance work after school," he said. "Had to help with the bills, you know?" I didn't know, actually. I'd never had to worry about bills in my life. But something about the way he said it, no self-pity, just stating facts, made me admire him even more. We started dating a month later. Zane was different from the rich boys I'd grown up with. He opened doors because he was genuinely polite, not because etiquette class had drilled it into him. When he took me out, it was to small family-owned restaurants where the food was amazing and the owners knew him by name. 6 months in, he proposed. Not with some massive diamond like my dad would have expected, just a simple silver band he'd saved up for, given to me during a sunset walk through campus. It was perfect. Dad was thrilled when I told him I was engaged, at first. He immediately planned this huge family dinner to meet my fiancé, inviting all our relatives. I could practically hear him imagining some heir to a Fortune 500 company. The moment we walked into our massive dining room, I knew I was wrong. I watched my family's faces change, like someone had flipped a switch, from eager smiles to barely concealed sneers. My Aunt Patricia actually clutched her pearls. Mom's champagne glass froze halfway to her mouth. The silence was deafening until Dad cleared his throat. The sound echoed through our massive dining room like a gunshot. I could feel Zane's hand tense in mine under the table. "So, young man," Dad said in that condescending tone he usually reserved for his employees, drawing out each word like he was speaking to a child, "tell us about your background. Where exactly are you from?" Zane sat up straighter, maintaining his dignity despite the hostile atmosphere. I admired how he kept his voice steady and respectful. "My parents immigrated from Syria when I was young, sir. We've been here since I was 6. "And what do your parents do?" Dad pressed, his lip curling slightly. The crystal chandelier above us cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look almost sinister. "My father works as a security guard at Atlantic Corp, and my mother works as a cleaner," Zane answered honestly. His voice remained firm and proud. "I've worked part-time jobs since I was old enough to help support them. But I was fortunate to earn a full scholarship to Preston." My mother practically choked on her wine and grabbed her water glass, taking desperate gulps. The pearls around her neck trembled with each swallow. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George exchanged meaningful looks, while Cousin Rebecca actually snickered behind her manicured hand. Dad's face was getting redder by the second. The vein in his forehead, the one that only appeared when he was truly angry, began to pulse. "Well," he said, pushing his plate away with such force that the expensive china rattled, "I hope you understand, young man, that my Abigail is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. She's never wanted for anything. How exactly do you plan to provide for her?" Before I could jump in, Zane responded calmly, his composure a stark contrast to my father's growing anger. "I'm already successfully trading in cryptocurrency markets, Mr. Stewart. I built a substantial portfolio, and I'm developing plans for my own tech startup." "Cryptocurrency?" Dad interrupted with a harsh laugh that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls. "You mean like what that scammer sold to Aunt Martha? The one who cleaned out her savings account?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Dad, that's completely different," I tried to explain, my heart pounding. "Zane's actually incredibly knowledgeable about blockchain technology. He's even been asked to speak at tech conferences." "Enough." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware jump. The sound made everyone at the table flinch, except Zane. "I know a con man when I see one. Your Aunt Martha thought she knew better too, didn't she?" "Mr. Stewart," Zane attempted to explain, still maintaining his composure even as my father's face grew darker, "I understand your concerns, but I assure you—" "No, you don't understand." Dad stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a screech that made my teeth hurt. He towered over the table, his hands planted firmly on the white tablecloth. "You're not suitable for my daughter. You're a migrant from a poor family. You don't understand our values, our way of life. You're not one of us." I watched in horror as my father, the man who'd taught me about business ethics and professional conduct, showed his true colors. The worst part was seeing how the rest of my family nodded along, as if he was just saying what they were all thinking. Dad wasn't done. His face twisted with rage as he jabbed his finger in Zane's direction. "I see right through you, you know that? You're just another gold digger with a sob story, trying to get your hands on my daughter's inheritance. David, please, Mom interrupted, but not to defend Zane. She turned to me with what she probably thought was a motherly expression. Honey, you're too young for marriage. Finish college first, come work at the company like we planned. There's plenty of time to think about marriage, with someone more suitable. Uncle George cleared his throat. He's probably just after the pharmacy chain, David. These people are clever that way. Remember the Martinez boy who tried dating Rebecca? Aunt Patricia chimed in, talking about Zane as if he wasn't even there. Same thing, all charm until they get what they want. I watched Zane's face as my family continued their verbal assault. He sat perfectly still, his expression composed, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped his water glass. What kind of future could you possibly offer her? Dad sneered. Living in some tiny apartment, eating microwave dinners, while you waste time on your imaginary internet money? That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward with a crash. Stop it. All of you, just stop. My voice shook with rage. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You're acting like entitled, prejudiced snobs. Abigail, Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. No, Mom, I'm done. I reached for Zane's hand. I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this family than I am right now. Come on, Zane, we're leaving. We walked toward the door, heads held high, while my relatives muttered and whispered behind us. Dad's voice boomed through the foyer as we reached for our coats. You walk out that door with him, Abigail, and you'll regret it. Do you hear me? After everything we've invested in you? All the money we spent on your education, your future? You owe us. I turned back one last time, meeting his furious gaze. The only thing I owe you is the courtesy of walking out instead of telling you exactly what I think of you right now. I heard him shouting about debts and obligations as we walked to Zane's car, but I didn't look back. Some debts, I was learning, weren't worth paying. A year flew by like a dream. Zane and I finished college, him with highest honors in computer science, me with my business degree. We'd moved into a modest apartment, and despite my family's dire predictions, we were happy. So when Zane suggested we stop waiting and get married that summer, I didn't hesitate. I spent hours crafting the perfect wedding announcement for social media. I posted a beautiful engagement photo of us, with a heartfelt message about love transcending boundaries. The responses started rolling in almost immediately. Not congratulations, attacks. Cousin Rebecca, I can't believe you're still with that fortune hunter. Count me out. Aunt Patricia, your poor parents must be so disappointed. We raised you better than this. Uncle George, no self-respecting steward would attend this travesty. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, each one more cruel than the last. I finally had to turn it off when my mother's comment appeared, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't expect us there." I cried for hours that night, while Zane held me and whispered that we could postpone, that maybe they just needed more time. But I was done waiting for my family to change. No, I said, wiping my eyes. We're getting married. With or without them. I didn't expect James to come. My brother was in the middle of an important dig in Egypt, something about a previously undiscovered tomb. But 2 days before the wedding, he showed up at our apartment door, covered in desert dust and grinning. You think I'd miss my little sister's wedding? He said, pulling me into a bear hug. Besides, someone's got to walk you down the aisle. The wedding was small but beautiful. We held it in a garden, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees. Zane's family filled one side of the aisle, warm, welcoming people who had embraced me as their own from day one. My side was painfully empty, save for James and a couple of distant cousins who had dared to defy the family boycott. A year passed. Zane's tech career was taking off, and I'd started my own small business consultancy. We were building our life together, brick by brick, without any help from the Stewart fortune. Then the invitation came. Your presence is requested at the 60th birthday celebration of David Stewart. My hand shook as I read it. After all this time, were they finally ready to make peace? I showed it to Zane, who squeezed my hand. It's your call, love, he said softly. But whatever you decide, we face it together. The night of the party, we dressed our best. I spent hours picking out the perfect gift, a rare first edition of my father's favorite business book, something that showed I still remembered, still cared. We walked into that familiar house, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. The room fell silent when we entered, just like that first dinner, but I pushed ahead. With trembling hands, I presented the carefully wrapped package to my father. He didn't even look at it. Just picked it up and tossed it aside like it was garbage, the beautiful paper crinkling as it landed among the other gifts. The dinner started like a perfectly choreographed show of cruelty. Every question, every comment was designed to wound. I watched in horror as my family took turns trying to break my husband's spirit. So, Uncle George drawled, swirling his expensive wine, still playing with your internet money, or have you found a real job yet? Before Zane could answer, Aunt Patricia chimed in. Dear, do you know which fork to use for the salad? She giggled, nudging my cousin Rebecca. These fancy dinners must be quite different from what you're used to. That's quite a simple suit you're wearing, my mother observed with a smirk. I suppose designer labels aren't in your budget? I wonder, cousin Rebecca piped up, have you ever even eaten truffle before tonight? They're quite expensive, you know. I watched Zane's face remain perfectly composed, even as they treated him like some sort of circus attraction. He'd built a successful life from nothing, earned every bit of respect he had in the tech world, and here they were, acting like he was beneath them because he didn't inherit his success. The breaking point came when my father raised his glass. You know, he announced to the table, loud enough to silence everyone, I always wondered what would happen to my daughter if she married beneath her station. Tell me, boy, does she miss her credit cards? Her shopping sprees? Or have you managed to save enough from your little computer games to keep her in the lifestyle she deserves? Something snapped inside me. I stood up so fast, my chair toppled backward. How dare you? I was shaking with rage. You sit here in your expensive clothes, in your massive house, acting like you're better than everyone else, when you're nothing but small, cruel people who've never earned a single thing in your lives. The room went dead silent. You think wealth makes you worthy? Look at yourselves. You're all so busy showing off your money that you've forgotten how to be human beings. Dad's face turned purple. He stood up, matching my stance. That's enough. I've had it with your ingratitude, your poor choices, your defense of this fortune hunter. He turned to face the table, raising his voice even louder. Let me make this absolutely clear, as of this moment, Abigail Stewart is no longer my daughter. She is disinherited, cut off completely. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he gestured to my cousin Michael, who'd been quietly preening at the other end of the table. This is my new successor. My nephew, who understands the value of family tradition, of maintaining our standards. The relatives burst into applause as Michael stood, bowing slightly. Thank you, Uncle David. I won't let you down like some people have. I looked around the table at these people I'd once called family. At my mother, clapping enthusiastically for my replacement. At my cousins, smirking with satisfaction. At my aunts and uncles, nodding approvingly at my public humiliation. Come on, Zane, I said, taking my husband's hand. We're done here. Permanently. The next few years passed like a whirlwind. Zane's cryptocurrency investments had been just the beginning. He used that capital to launch his own tech company, developing innovative AI solutions for businesses. Within 3 years, TechVision Enterprises was valued at over $500 million. The same internet money my father had mocked had transformed into an empire. I watched with pride as my husband's name began appearing in business magazines and tech journals. 30 Under 30, Most Innovative CEO, Tech Visionary of the Year, the accolades kept coming. But what made me proudest was how success hadn't changed him. He still opened doors for people, still remembered every employee's name, still wore simple clothes, though now they were tastefully expensive rather than cheap. I wanted to find my father and show him all these headlines. Show him how wrong he'd been. But we hadn't spoken since that disastrous birthday dinner, and honestly, I'd found peace in that silence. Then the invitation arrived. You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Stewart. I stared at the thick cream envelope in disbelief. The same cousin who'd mocked Zane's table manners, who'd made snide comments about his clothes, was now inviting us to her wedding? Look what came in the mail, I said to Zane that evening, holding up the invitation. He read it carefully, then looked at me with those kind eyes I'd fallen in love with years ago. Maybe we should go. In my culture, we believe family is sacred, even when they hurt us. So there we were, walking into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, where Rebecca's wedding was being held. The reaction was unexpected. Oh my God, is that Zane Hassan? The TechVision CEO? Did you see his interview in Tech Weekly? I heard he just closed a deal with Microsoft. Can I get a picture with you, Mr. Hassan? The same relatives who'd once looked down their noses at my poor immigrant husband were now falling over themselves to get his attention. Former critics were now eager fans, shoving business cards into his hands, asking for investment advice, begging for photos. I watched as Zane handled it all with characteristic grace, smiling for photos, answering questions politely, making everyone feel heard and respected, even those who'd never shown him the same courtesy. Your husband is absolutely brilliant, gushed Aunt Patricia, the same aunt who'd mocked his table manners years ago. Did you know he was featured in Forbes? I just smiled, thinking how funny life can be. The fortune hunter they'd accused him of being had built his own fortune, bigger than anything the Stewarts had ever imagined. But unlike them, he wore his success with humility and kindness. I should have known something was off when my parents made a beeline for our table. Mom was wearing her most ingratiating smile, the one she usually reserved for wealthy potential investors, while Dad had plastered on his best business face. Darling, Mom cooed, air-kissing my cheeks. And Zane? We've been following your incredible success in the news. So proud to call you family. I couldn't help myself. Really? The same poor immigrant you couldn't bear to have at your table a few years ago? They flinched, but recovered quickly. Dad cleared his throat, loosening his collar, which, I noticed, wasn't from his usual luxury brand. Water under the bridge, sweetheart. Family is family, right? Then came the real reason for their sudden change of heart. Over the wedding appetizers, the story spilled out. Michael, their precious replacement heir, had nearly destroyed Stewart Pharmaceuticals. In his eagerness to cut costs, he'd signed contracts with shady suppliers. Now they were facing multiple lawsuits for selling counterfeit medications. The FDA is investigating, Dad said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The banks won't touch us. We're in trouble, princess. The legal fees alone. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. We've had to mortgage everything. Dad reached across the table, placing his hand over Zane's. Son, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you're family. And family helps family, right? We just need a loan to tide us over. A few million should do it. I saw Zane's face soften with sympathy. My husband, always so quick to forgive, was already reaching for his checkbook. I placed my hand over his, stopping him. Family helps family? I repeated, my voice ice cold. Funny, I remember you specifically saying we weren't family anymore. In fact, didn't you disown me? Twice? Now, Abigail, Dad's voice took on that warning tone from my childhood, after everything we'd done for you. You taught me some valuable lessons, Dad, I cut him off. Like how not to give money to strangers. Isn't that what you always said? His face turned that familiar shade of purple. You ungrateful little. And about keeping high standards, I continued, my voice carrying just as the wedding DJ asked everyone to raise their glasses to the happy couple. So I'm sorry, but I don't associate with people who sell fake medications to sick people just to save a buck. Dad exploded, jumping to his feet. How dare you? After everything I've done for you. I raised you, educated you. And disowned me, I finished, standing calmly. Twice. Let's make it 3 times, you can disown me again if you'd like, but it won't change my answer. Taking Zane's hand, we walked out of the reception, my father's curses following us just like they had years ago. Only this time I was smiling. That was 3 years ago. James keeps me updated on family news, not that I ask. The mighty Stewart Pharmaceuticals went bankrupt. The mansion where I grew up was sold at auction. Dad and Mom downsized to a condo, selling their luxury cars and Mom's precious jewelry to pay legal fees. Sometimes I think about that dinner years ago, when Dad called Zane a fortune hunter. Life has a funny way of showing us who people really are. My poor immigrant husband built an empire through hard work and integrity, while my respectable family lost everything through greed and shortcuts. But you know what? I learned that real wealth isn't about money at all. It's about having people in your life who stand by you when it matters, who lift you up instead of tearing you down. By that measure, I'm the richest woman in the world.